Welcome to the Into the Wilderness podcast. I'm your host, Byron Pace. I am recording this intro on the 20th of January, 2021. This podcast is going to be with Bill Roden, who is the Chief Marketing Officer of Modern Huntsman, a man of many talents. We recorded this a week or two back when we were in Montana. It's an incredibly varied show. We talk a lot about the outdoors industry in terms of marketing and companies and brand interaction with the public, be that within the outdoors space or like outside that community, and how they represent themselves to the greater world as well as the people who participate in those activities. We dive into this sort of factionalization of the outdoor space. He talks at great length about his time in big cities working in marketing and this desire to be in the great outdoors and how he balanced that. And the show ends with this fascinating conversation about great writers and what Bill has taken from great writers into his own work. There's some really interesting insights in there. And if you're somebody who writes at all or is just intrigued about the process, I think you'll be able to take something from it. But before we get into the show, first of all, I want to thank all of the Patreon supporters, every single one of you. If you would like to support this show, and you really do help make these shows possible, then head over to patreon.com/Byron Pace and you can have a look at the tiers there and support the show. I also have a new way that you can support the show if you just want to have a one-off payment rather than something that's monthly like on Patreon, is just head over to byronpace.com, click podcast, and there's a donate button. Just use PayPal or a credit card and you can just make a one-off payment and leave a note. Every dollar makes, or pound, or whatever currency from whatever part of the world you're from, makes a massive difference in making these shows possible. Top tier patrons for this month include Richard Stevens, Richard McNeil, Ronnie Speakman of rdcontracting.co.uk, Tom McCraith, James Benjamin Normandale, James Marchington, the guys at South Ayrshire Stalking, Josh Starling, Thomas Cameron, Mark Zabrowski, and the team at Galax Clothing. Of course, these podcasts are brought to you by Modern Huntsman. They have been our partner on the show for a long time now, and I am the conservation editor for that publication. Volume 6 is out, and you can read all about Modern Huntsman, including you can go and order all of the volumes on modernhuntsman.com. There's some really exciting stuff coming out with Modern Huntsman in the next couple of weeks, actually. So I would encourage you, if you like this podcast, if you like the content that Modern Huntsman put out, head over to their website and stick your email address in their subscription box so that you're a newsletter subscriber, because that's how you're going to hear about all these new things first. And also, obviously, go over to their Instagram. Their Instagram's amazing, and that's just Modern Huntsman. With all of that said, I think that is us. We're going to dive straight into this show with Bill Roden. Bill, welcome to the Into the Wilderness podcast.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
It's great to have another podcaster on the show.
Right.
So
well,
you're telling me, I mean...
New podcaster. Newish.
Newish. Well, when did you start your podcast?
Started about a year, well, technically 2 years ago, but almost on the regular for about a year.
Okay. And it's called?
The Tailgate Podcast. It's a podcast specifically for the hunting, somewhat the outdoor industry, but really focuses more on the marketing side of things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And you did that with somebody?
I did that with Andy Anderson, photographer, friend of mine. Yep.
And what
hunting
was...
buddy.
And the reason for starting that was something you felt like wasn't being talked about?
Yes to that. Really, it was more of a formal continuation of a lot of the conversations that Andy and I would have after a hunt. We'd sit on the tailgate, kind of recap the hunt. Since we're both in the world of marketing, Andy's a photographer by trade. I'm a copywriter, creative director, marketing director by background.
So just a few things.
Just a few things, right. I'm old, but no, we've but we would spend a lot of time having worked, for a lot of, big global brands, consumer packaged goods brands, automotive brands, we used to always have conversations about the kind of work we liked in the hunting industry, the kind of work we didn't like, some things that we were surprised hunting and angling brands weren't doing that a lot of other brands were doing, even in the outdoor space. And we would have conversations with other people, and they used to kind of prod us to say, you should start a podcast about that because you're obviously very opinionated about it. You have a lot of strong feelings about it. And, there are a lot of industry marketing, trades in the advertising world, but there really isn't something like that in the hunting and angling space. So we put it together. We didn't really think it was going to be anything formal, but it was really flattering, and I'm humbled to say this, that we had a lot of hand raisers that reached out because they wanted to talk about marketing. We had a lot of folks who wanted to learn more about what other brands were doing, not just from what they were seeing that these brands were putting out into the world, but how are they structuring their companies? How did they build marketing plans? Did they build marketing plans? Were they, diving into the performance marketing side of things? And so, as sophisticated as some hunting brands are, and I don't think hunting brands get enough credit for the level of talent that they have, but either brands are really up to speed on all the tools and tips and tricks and things like that are available to hunting brands, and I should say brands in general out there. So I guess where I'm going with that is that, boy, and if I'm choosing my words, sound like I'm choosing my words carefully, I am. I think some brands who've brought folks from other industries into their world brought a lot of sophistication on the marketing side, because the world of marketing is just from a platform standpoint, tool standpoint. And I apologize for the buzzword so early in the day here, but they brought a lot of that in, and they really saw a real up to the right kind of graph in terms of audience engagement and growth and the ability to target new growth audiences and things like that. So either brands were really doing it well or they weren't doing it at all. So, and I would say even in the past couple of years, I've even seen a significant shift in a lot of brands really getting up to speed on just putting into practice what a lot of the general brand world is doing. So, but it's really been really exciting to see just how a lot of hunting and angling brands have really matured, how they've, and as a result, have really been able to punch out of the general hunting and angling space into the general sort of, culture space, as well as a result of, better reach and better frequency and all the side effects of what good marketing can do for you as a brand.
Please tell me that you recorded it on the tailgate of a truck.
We actually, that was our goal.
Because you would come back from a hunt and you'd sit on the tailgate and
absolutely.
talk shit and drink coffee
absolutely.
and whiskey or whatever.
That was the goal, but it was hard to, wind was always a factor.
Absolutely, yeah.
Really crappy podcast equipment was a factor. But we ended up really, we actually would travel to the brands where it was really great to just immerse ourselves in the company headquarters, the people, and then kind of spend the day with a brand and then record the podcast afterwards. So we'd be able to really speak to what we saw.
So you had like a foundation of knowledge to be able to ask this question. How open were people from different brands in terms of their thinking and strategy and ethos and why they were where they are at that current time and the journey that they had taken and what their vision for the future was? Was there a big spectrum of that? I imagine there are a lot of cards that are being held pretty close to the chest when it comes to that, because there's a lot of companies that are in competition with one another.
That's a great question. Surprisingly open. We actually anticipated a lot of brands not wanting to jump on because first and foremost, we didn't think anyone was going to listen to it. We thought or maybe our spouses would listen to it, and log on a lot with different usernames to make us feel better. But I say this humbly here. It was really great, and we had not only just marketing level folks, but we've had chairmen of the companies and the boards on, we've had CEOs on. So it's been a good spectrum of various levels of each company on. But, they were very excited to, and again, they were excited for us. They were excited, to come on and share their stories. And I would say, there's a lot I wish I could have put in because, we always allow every podcast guest to listen to it first before we push it out.
That's very
live,
generous of you. I never do that.
Which, I've been on a couple of podcasts where, I'm literally in the truck on the way home. I'm like, oh my God, I just ended my career. I can't believe I just said that. But what we cut out, what hasn't been in that I wish we could put in was when we started to get into the secret sauce kind of thing. We started to get into, how they built their plans. And I think, and justifiably, while it was really great conversation and it's a really, relevant material, I think a lot of people were really nervous that, because one thing I've seen in this industry, there are a lot of fast followers. I've actually seen some folks, not necessarily even here to NDAs, so which I'm a big stickler about. But regardless, I am really, really proud of the conversations that we had, and really the spirit of our podcast was really to try to help brands. And this isn't coming from a sense of self-importance or worthiness, but really help brands develop more creative cultures within their brands, and to really get to fresh ideas. And I don't say this as any indictment, but a lot of times this industry can be one-dimensional. People go to the well, for the same kind of ideas, the type of content they put out there. And we were really trying
a lot of copycatting,
right? And we were trying to goose the industry a little bit, and again, not from this ivory tower standpoint by any means, but there, again, it goes back to the conversations we'd have where we'd say the outdoor industry, the outdoors in general, is so ripe full of amazing characters, just amazing experiences that are ripe for really great content ideas, story ideas. And why weren't brands talking about this? They were focusing more on, kind of post-mortem hunts or, hunt recap type stuff, or, they turned hunting itself into a spectator sport. They would, it was always, the animal they were pursuing, the method of take. And it was
a very sort of generic formula for many
absolutely.
years.
And they're all, in hunting, the hunting media, I should say, as it stands now, is relatively young, but there are some things that were instantly played out. There are, a lot of new tropes just, were established quickly. And so, again, another reason for this podcast was that, because I had been consulting with a lot of hunting and angling brands, outdoor brands in general. And, my argument always was, you're preaching to the choir. You're coming across like a fast follower, but you're really just adding to this noise out there. And as a result, brands really weren't differentiating themselves. They really weren't talking about their firsts and onlys that really could have, helped them truly differentiate themselves. So this is really just trying to highlight some of the things that are keeping brands up at night, sharing the things that have worked for them and haven't worked for them. And really the goal was to really kind of an all boats rise kind of approach where let's talk about creativity in this space, the lack thereof in certain corners, the opportunities in other corners. And I'd like to, the feedback has been really great. Really, really, again, humbled by that as well. And it was like any industry and everybody, culturally as well. COVID was a real hit for us because it the better podcasts we had were in person, where again we could spend.
They're
time.
Always better when you're in person.
Yeah, and also just because you really, even walking around a company, I would say this conversation I had with this product line manager.
Mm-hmm. Gives you something
that would be one of the best brand campaigns ever, just in terms of their point of view, and so but it's a lot of fun, and I'm one of those weirdos that really loves what he does each and every day, and I get out of bed.
That's the best way to be.
With both feet on the floor at the same time, because I'm really excited about the potential, the untapped potential for this industry specifically. Really excited, just that there's such a lot of change going on in the industry right now, and obviously I'm sure we'll get to this, the perception and culture. It's much different now than even it was when, I was really, getting deeper into hunting and angling when I left the world of, adventure sports. I was a competitive bike racer, 24-hour mountain bike racer, climber, and I was kind of more focused on the general outdoor. But when I started really diving more on the regular, and I should say even more self-identifying as a hunter and angler than other things, I've seen such change culturally in terms of how brands are perceived, in terms of how hunting media is perceived.
It's really important, and I definitely want to dive into that. I think maybe before we go down that very deep rabbit hole, you are now part of the Modern Huntsman team.
Yeah.
So you've been talking about your podcast and a little bit about your background and where you've come from in the marketing world. But now Modern Huntsman are a partner of this podcast, Into the Wilderness, and have been for a long time. And I'm conservation editor for Modern Huntsman, and this is the first time we've had a chance to meet in person. What is your role within Modern Huntsman now, and how does your vision of, and this might take forever, how does your vision of the future mesh with the sort of Modern Huntsman mission? Because we talk about that a lot. What is and we're gonna we'll dive into it. And we've dived into it in the past with Tyler. I need to get him back on the show again so we can kind of get a refresh about the volumes that have been out recently and that sort of transition from volume 1 to where we're on now and what has changed both within the publication and the team and also within the industry, because we're now talking a couple of years.
Yeah.
So you're Bill. As part of Modern Huntsman, what do you do, Bill?
Well, so I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for Modern Huntsman, and my role, like a lot of us here, it's pretty multifaceted. But really, first and foremost, it's how can brands work with a hunting outdoor publication differently? There's obviously identifying and building ad space. There's chasing brands down for ad dollars.
Sorry to interrupt you here, but it's been a very. If I think about back home in the UK, and I think about brands and particularly print publications, which I've also been involved in for more than a decade, there was a very sort of fundamental way that they engaged.
Right.
It was take an A4 or a one-page spread And if you had the big dollars, it was the back outside page of the publication, probably syndicated for 12 months because you were doing one issue a year.
Right.
And that was basically the game plan.
Yeah.
That was basically the game plan. And if you had the money, you're a big enough company, you do exactly the same thing in every publication within your niche.
Yeah.
And that way you were in front of everybody.
Yeah. No,
but I always felt like it was... after a period of time, maybe if you're just getting into it and suddenly you've got all these brands in your face, it's kind of, it's colorful and there's light and it's sexy. But after a month or two of seeing the same stuff in every publication you pick up, it's just noise. You just tune it out.
Yeah. Yeah. And just like TV spots, you're interrupting, people's normally scheduled programming, right? To sell something, at every opportune moment. Yeah. For Modern Huntsman, and it's something we'll always adhere to, something that I've always respected even before my time at Modern Huntsman, is that a lot of times, as you mentioned, brands live on top of the media, right? They kind of appear in certain places, but Modern Huntsman, we integrate brands into our world. So they live in our world. So what I mean by that is that they partner with us on content and stories. They partner with us on everything from recipes. We don't run print ads per se in Modern Huntsman, but what we do is, and we don't just do product shows either. We don't do top 25 tree stands of 2020, and there are, first and foremost, because there are publications that would do it just far better than us anyway. But we really like to tell the story of the brand, of the people who are part of the brand, and talk about more of the why when they get up in the morning and they make the things they do. We just think that's really interesting to our audience. And also there's really no other publication at this time that really gets into that level. And because, again, almost like my podcast, there's so many great stories about brands, not just about the things that they're making and the innovations that they're doing. So that's one thing I really love about Modern Huntsman, is that we really work with brands to help them tell their story. Outside of, again, as I said, the things they make. Another part of my remit is looking at how can we evolve Modern Huntsman into more of a true media company. So I have a lot of background in Hollywood and television shows and things like that. So how can we start pushing out into that world where we're doing, either entertainment, we're doing, conservation sort of documentaries, things like that really, because again, while we certainly put out, we're a biannual publication, and we have a website that has stories on it, but how can we really prove out our mission?
Because
really
reframing
the narrative,
difference.
Right? It really is
changing something in the future.
Yeah.
And I think in my mind, a lot of content. I'm not just talking in the hunting fishing space. Just generally, a lot of content out there.
Yeah.
In my mind, there's so much that it's difficult to know what to consume sometimes as a consumer, but equally, it's difficult to know where to find the content that actually moves something forward.
Right.
Because if you're not shaping an opinion, or at least providing new information so that you can either bolster a position or maybe change your position, then what are you really doing?
Right.
You know, there's entertainment. There's something, like we get a lot of pleasure out of watching something or reading something that's just for pure entertainment purposes. But I think that there's a lot of that out there.
Yeah.
And one of the things that really attracted me to Modern Huntsman from the beginning was this idea of shifting a narrative and trying to understand through our own evolution and growth how these pursuits of hunting and fishing and being embedded in the great outdoors is actually relevant in a world where people are increasingly moving from the outdoors into these manufactured environments that humans make in cities. I think everyone is well aware of this exodus out the countryside, although maybe actually post-COVID, maybe we're going to see the opposite. But still, even if we see that, there is definitely, and we talk about this a lot, and loads of people have said it, but there is definitely this disconnect with nature.
Right.
And so how do we take these activities and make them relevant? Right. And those discussions haven't necessarily been had in the past.
No, that's a great point. I think, when I talk about TV shows, I know that can mean a lot of different things, but, some TV shows are just, again, it's almost like watching a football game. You're sort of following along on a hunt. I think some stories are better seen. Other stories are better read. Some are better heard, through not only just podcasts, but even through audiobooks, which I'd love to even see more of that in our world, because we're all, we all have a lot of windshield time as we're driving across the country doing hunts.
Absolutely.
But I think that, for us, it's really looking at, we have all these stories we want to tell. One thing I also really love, and it's something that, I'm personally working on here, is how can we really start to really tell the story of the culture of hunting and angling? And what I mean by that is just the conservation groups, certainly, what I've seen, having, I should say, really been in this for about 20 years, is just how much has changed, where it's really become everyone kind of excited for each other that you're a hunter or an angler, to these scattered tribes. And, I think that,
So you're saying that's what we're seeing now?
Oh, I absolutely think so. Oh, yeah. I mean, we've seen...
So paint a picture of that kind of story arc of the hunting and fishing, and maybe there's a difference there. I think there certainly is at home in terms of like how it's viewed from the public perception between hunting and fishing, but we can maybe dig into that later. Hunting and fishing sits within the outdoors industry.
Yeah.
It's one component of it, and it's often shunned by many. Yep. Fishing less so, but certainly the hunting part of it. What is that story arc over, say, like the last 5 or 6 decades in terms of the interaction with people who are not participating in it, and how has that changed how has the community changed and how the community is viewed? Because what you've just alluded to there is where we are sitting right now is there seems to be these factions within the hunting community, if we're talking about hunting specifically, although I think it exists within the fishing as well, which could be argued is detrimental to this bigger picture. So how did we get there?
Boy, I don't know if I have the best answer for that, or else it would probably take me 8 hours to try to find my way into it. But
just go for it.
I'll just riff. Well, I think there's a lot of cognitive dissonance out there right now. I'm going back to the cycling world. While it was very competitive, the goal was to get as many people into cycling as possible, to make sure the sport endures, to bring up the next generation, also to make sure that, and again, on the bike racing side, that, the peloton was getting bigger every year. But there was never, what I'm seeing, at least in the hunting and angling, less again, more in the hunting space, I should say, is that, there's a lot of us versus them mentality that's really creeped in recently.
Like within the community.
Absolutely.
So like different types of hunting.
A lot of things have been politicized, which,
we're seeing that a lot right now, obviously.
Right. A lot of things politicized, election. But, a lot of rhetoric weaponized. It's an industry where a lot of, organizations and brands and foundations and what have you, always preach, from the perspective of, we got to bring up the next generation. We got to, because we're all seeing, again, this is even, is more of an observation, not an insight, but we are seeing a precipitous decline in hunting. We've seen some good spikes during COVID, but when you really look at the numbers, it's a declining industry from hunters coming in.
I'm going to keep that thought just so that I don't forget. I just saw something the other day that, in the news that said that an extra 100,000 people had applied for fishing licenses in England alone.
I believe that
over COVID.
Yeah.
So there's a spike for you.
Yeah, it's a good spike, and I'm still absolutely delusionally positive about just the future of hunting and angling, and just there's so many great entities out there that are really doing just really great jobs of welcoming new folks in. But when it comes to just messaging or even just the community itself, I should say, again, this is the cognitive dissonance side where everyone's trying to welcome new hunters in. There's this really blowback for new hunters self-identifying as hunters and posting on social, where they're really getting called out as being posers or fake, and and I've never understood. I think you and I have talked about this before, but I've never understood this thing about the hardcore hunter versus the newbie, right?
What is hardcore?
I don't know what hardcore is. I mean, honestly,
you should know, Bill.
The people in my own definition, the most hardcore hunters, they're not on Instagram.
No, they're not.
They're not broadcasting the fact that they're a hardcore hunter. They're not really precious about it, and they're just excited that people hunt. And I think it's as a result, I think it's led a lot of new hunters to feel like either they weren't welcomed, or B, that the learning curve is going to be so steep and there's really no one to mentor them. And there are a couple of really good entities out there that are really dialing up the mentor-mentee side of things, which I think is wonderful. But I'm really surprised that there seems to be this like self-hate coming in sometimes about new hunters coming in, because we need new hunters coming in, economically, conservation-wise, but that's something I've really been most surprised about. You certainly have like Jerry's and Gapers in the ski world, but it's more of just kind of like a lighthearted, kind of piss taking a little bit, versus here where people are really calling out new hunters, whether it's on forums or on comments and things like that. But I think that, so to headline it here, I think that I'm really surprised at how fractured this industry has really gotten in the past 5 years, where it's, you're either wearing this brand or that brand, or you're this type of hunter or that type of hunter. Either you're, and again, there's just the amount of political rhetoric in this industry is, and I definitely think there's a place and there should be homes for it. But I think that it's really dominating, and it's becoming really divisive at a time when we all need to band together, really to be champions of one another. Really bring up and really welcome new people in, and that also includes more diversity and inclusivity. And what I mean by that is there are, and I'll start almost from an economic standpoint, having worked in run an outdoor brand and worked for outdoor brands. It's really it's amazing that there are audiences out there, African Americans, Asian American, Latino cultures, and hunters and anglers who are grossly marginalized, grossly underrepresented, who are feeling like they're stuck on the sidelines. They've got a lot of money that they want to put into this world, whether it's through gear, donations, time even, but they just don't see themselves in the equation. And they don't, so in turn don't feel welcome. And, after a while, some might just bounce out, because, but they want to self-identify as hunters and anglers. And a lot of brands preach that they're open to this, but you don't see it reflected in their marketing one bit, or any of their communications. And
so, how does that change? Does that change in the marketing office?
That changes really at all levels. The people they hire, the people making the work, the folks that they include in their content or shows or things like that. There are definitely some really great bright spots. In fact, one entity I'm really excited about is Brown Folks Fishing. Where
you mentioned this to me the other day. Yeah, I've never heard of it.
I think
so. This is an organization, isn't it?
It's an organization, and it's I think they were just fed up, and they said, "Listen, if you're not going to represent us, if we're not going to feel part of your world, we'll just create our own world." And I used to sit in these meetings where you're poring over all the analytics and consumer segmentation and data and all those buzzwords. You would see that, wow, like Asian Americans are a fast growing segment in the outdoor space in general, but brands aren't. But they're invisible, And it was always just kind of a head shaker for me because, just from a growth standpoint, from a business standpoint, and again, in a category and industry standpoint, I still think we're pretty slow to the draw on that front. And so that's something that we talked about a great deal on our podcast. A lot of brands are also worried that if they start, they're going to start pandering. And I guess my best answer for that is just start. Just
get it done.
Just get it done, because you got to start at some point. And, it's the hunting and angling industries, I don't think are much of a mirror reflection of how America really is. And I think the more we get there, the more it'll grow. And, I think new stories and ideas and ways to do things will come into play. And for me, it just seems like such a great way to just evolve, grow, expand, dimensionalize, this way of life. And for some reason, brands are pretty slow to get going on that. And
I wonder if that kind of draws somewhat back to this increased factionalization that we see now, where it's not. Whereas in the past, maybe it was seen as way more inclusive in terms of the types of activities that you did. I'm not even just talking about people, but whatever type of activity you did, whether it was, I don't know, I'm picking a silly example here, but I think this actually exists now. If you're an inverted commas hardcore fly fisherman, turning your nose up at the guy who likes to sit and bait for carp.
Yeah.
And you can expand that out, and it becomes like one is better than the other.
Yeah.
So do you think maybe we're not as... And it's weird for me to say this, because this is like when we sit around the table here at like the Modern Huntsman team, we are going to every corner of the world and every culture you can possibly think of to try and work out what stories haven't been told that we can tell. Like that is what we do all the time. That's like every phone call that we have. But I realize that that's not representative of what's going on in the rest of the industry necessarily.
Absolutely, yeah.
And maybe that's one of the things that I think makes Modern Huntsman so important. And maybe it just sounds like I'm trying to blow smoke because I'm also involved, but I think it's true.
Well, it is. I mean, we sat and had a session yesterday where we were discussing everything, but I'm still looking for it. But there seems to be this unofficial rule book out there, this golden unofficial rule book or quasi official rule book. But the thing I've always scratched just from my own personal philosophy, however you want to hunt or fish, as long as it's not illegal, but however you want to do it, however you want to talk about it, just do it. But people get flamed pretty hard. I know it's an industry that really likes to thumb its nose at cancel culture, but the the hunting and angling industries are very quick to cancel people out. So that's another cognitive dissonance there. But
if it doesn't fit,
the mold, but I'm always surprised that like who's writing these rules, right? I mean, I think a lot of companies, a lot of entities seem to be battling for whose point of view is right, which for me seems like such a zero-sum game. I mean, I don't understand. We should be as long as you're doing, that's fine, that's great. Again, I've always been really surprised that, and I should say I experienced this when I was coming into this. Even though I've been fly fishing forever, I still feel like I'm learning, right, and I'm still a total gaper in fly fishing. But I think that I certainly felt that pressure right away, and you had to, and I've said this a few times, I'll probably get flamed for it, but, there was this long time thing, if you were, the only way to be taken seriously as a duck hunter is if you had the banded lanyard, a big beard, and you ascribe to these kind of politics, and, and you can sort of find those in sort of every facet of this industry, but I've always been surprised that people get so hung up on how other people are doing things, and, again, I think it's really limiting. And again, from not only just an economic standpoint and a financial standpoint for companies, but it's just really limiting for growth. And I think and I'm not saying this is just truly endemic to the hunting and angling space. I was a big climbing poser for years. I did it, never felt I was great at it, but there were definitely ways you had to be vegan, you had to climb in these areas. So every little there's that preciousness to any kind of passion or pursuit, right? Yeah. But it's really
we want people to break the mold,
right?
But that's what we're about.
Exactly right, and it's very pronounced in the hunting and angling space.
It is,
and that was another sort of impetus behind the podcast, because we said, just creatively, you're really leaving a lot of potentially interesting things that could really reach and mean a lot to people on the table. Because you're afraid to put some things out, you're afraid to embrace these audiences and what have you. So,
what about in the recent years, I'm trying to think how far back I have to cast my mind, but probably the last 5 years, this realization of external attacks against hunting, particularly, much less so against fishing, although we do see some aspects of it, say in like shark fishing and some big game fishing, has been to really embrace a conservation message, which in many respects I think is awesome. But there is a feeling, and I see it time and time again, where you can't help but wonder whether it's just brands jumping on a bandwagon because they know it's a box that they need to tick.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
That's a great question. Well, this is my own personal. This is my own, I'm on my own cloud here. I believe that if you're a business or you're an organization that makes money on the outdoors, you have an obligation to protect it, give back, and make sure that conservation's a big part of your messaging. I also do believe, and I believe that for brands as well. I grew up in a very small town, Sun Prairie, Wisconsin, and hunting was just part of the fabric of our life back then, where it was just so ingrained. But conservation was kind of invisible at the time, and I will say this: there's a great deal more of conservation centric things out there, which is great, but I do think that really, how do I say this? I think if you, where would we be without the outdoors? And I think we're losing more access, than we've had in the past. And some areas are losing access while others are gaining access. But I think that. Also some people just in their areas, don't have access. And, I'm not saying if you hunt private, that's bad. I'm not saying, you only have to hunt public. But I do think that for me, I also think you dive deeper into your passion when you connect more with your environment, what affects your environment. I also just really dork out on a lot of the science behind things. And it's been really interesting to see the effects of bad or I should say mismanagement and whatnot. So there are a lot of the right conversations had, but I wish it was a little bit more centralized and more of a daily diet for this category.
Sure. My mind kind of goes, we were talking about this briefly the other day, I think it was with yourself, which was that how much responsibility the brands have, so whatever brand, whatever they're producing, in terms of their marketing plan and the kind of message that tells, and the way that they portray themselves to really embrace this. So the one very generic example that if you were to go back in probably any hunting publication around the world for almost any brand of scope manufacturer will be, the monster buck inside a crosshair. Yeah. Probably at some point in their history, they would have, that would have been a one-page marketing campaign.
Yeah.
Have we moved on from that now? Or should we move on from it? Is it important? What does that say?
So yes, I would say we have been moving on. I use the royal we. The industry has really moved on from that, but it still has a great deal of overly aspirational messaging. I would say in some respects, it's really created a lot of false expectations of the experience. I think that and I've even seen this in groups. A lot of times people don't understand what the overall experience is really like, and that the other experiences outside of just harvesting an animal are really what make it so amazing. And I think that's even what some brands are touching on it, but I think brands can do that more. But it's always the win, and this was certainly really analogous to the general outdoor space. I've worked on a lot of big the big two apparel brands out there. And what I used to always say this in my marketing, and we even hear this in consumer groups, that it was always about conquering and going out and kicking nature's ass. It was always about somehow winning, like this concept of winning.
It's like conquering of the West. Isn't it? It's like getting one over nature.
Yeah, exactly. Which so I think some brands have really come out where it's more about communing with nature, and of course they saw this just massive hockey stick graph spike and just affinity and love and all those things. But yeah, I think that there was this sense that you had to get something out of it, versus just communing with it, just enjoying the experience. And I that's why I think I'm not going to lie. I've seen again the research where and I've even seen this on the social side, whenever, and I've even seen this myself, when, I don't post a lot of grip and grins on my social. I've had a lot of people reach out, are you even really a hunter and stuff like that? But, a lot of people get that. But every time I've ever posted a picture of a fish, or I've, shown an elk, some of my Colorado elk, I get a lot more likes, but, so it does work. And so I don't think brands are doing it because they think that's how it should be so much as they just know that it works. It gets a lot of play. But and sometimes it's kind of hard to make community with nature really exciting, and particularly when you're just competing for attention out there. So I get why people go to what works, but I think unfortunately they get really addicted to that. So there's a balance, I think, that brands can do, and again, I don't want to say like it's like the systemic problem. Brands are doing a lot more, but yeah, I think that wow, I mean, I think what we're a little tone deaf to is that there are a lot of reasons people coming into hunting. I came into it through food.
I think that's a common story these days.
Big nerdy, healthy, foodie. But and that's why I did it. So some people come through, the farm table kind of thing or the wild game thing. Other people come into it just to find a way to really tie more skill sets together. For me, that's another thing I really loved about hunting. It was like a real aha for me was that, wow, I can, I did a lot of bushcraft, courses over the years. I did a lot of survival courses, things like that. And it was really great to kind of tie in camping skills and survival skills and bushcraft skills. And it was kind of the one thing that kind of pulled all together into one experience that, it tied to all the things I really loved together in one. So that's really why I do it. But other people come in because they do it exclusively for food. Other people come in because they do love the trophy. They love hanging out with friends, and it's a way to get together with friends all around the world. And so, however you want to do it, again, it is fine. But I think that brands can get very one-dimensional. The industry can get very one-dimensional as to the one reason why you need to do this, or if you don't do it this way, then you really kind of ass out, and things like that. But brands, and I've seen this in groups as well. Brands, particularly in the hunting and angling space, are really the first stop for 90% of new hunters.
In terms of how they see what they're...
How they learn about what's out there,
okay.
How they determine, like, how should I be dressing,
so before they're doing the deep dive into long, lengthy articles, it's the brand books, adverts, right? And this brochure we have sitting here,
absolutely,
on boots.
So I do believe this is, and again, my own personal philosophy here, but I do believe that brands have a great deal of responsibility to really either, accurately represent, ethically represent hunting and angling, because people follow brands a lot more in this space than I've seen in other categories I've worked on in my past professional life.
Even in other parts of the outdoors?
Absolutely.
Space? Really?
Absolutely, yeah.
So they really do have this amazing pull and responsibility.
They have a lot of power on whether people want to come into this world or don't. And again, I'm not wagging my finger or indicting brands, but and I also think that's a really great thing for brands as well, because
it's great if they've got
right,
but equally there's the responsibility attached.
Right, absolutely,
like Spider-Man.
Absolutely, there you go, absolutely,
with great power,
exactly. And so I think that as a result, and again, I even say creatively that just gives such a wider canvas for brands in terms of stories they tell, how they show up in the world, who they market to and talk to, and in turn embrace. But yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of times, and this is sort of obviously similar in the ski and snow world, but snow even in skate world, I should say. But I think that hunting brands really are what are really driving this industry, which you talk about in trends. When I was first coming in, even in the big game hunting, all those years ago, you never. Like, brands really didn't have the clout that they did. Like, more of the magazines really did, or books really did, or
it's probably characters as well.
And characters as well. And obviously there were always and I'm dating myself. I grew up watching Babe Winkleman and all those. And but you didn't have brands really defining and really caring where it's going. Or in a lot of ways, brands have really invented sort of trends in the industry. So brands. They're powerful in this space for sure. Absolutely, they have a great deal of influence on the health of the organization and the health of the industry, I should say, for sure.
In terms of the hunting industry and interaction and communication and perception with people who are not inside the hunting community. How do you see that? I mean, it's kind of an extension of what we've been talking about here, but we've been more been focusing like internally. How does that communication change? I mean, it's no secret that in probably pretty much every country around the world, people who hunt, particularly, like I said before, more so than fishing, although I think that's coming as we start to talk about things like catch and release, where we've already seen in some European countries you're not allowed to do that anymore. There's a lot of pressure. And there are, if I think about my older friends who have hunted their whole life, I think if you were to ask them, they'll probably say that they're glad that they got to enjoy it because they can't see it lasting for to the end of their kids' lives.
Yeah.
Which is a really, and I don't know if it's just that they're so jaded because they weren't used to these attacks and bad stories and highlighting the ethical and moral issues, which I think we all need to tackle in our own minds. They weren't used to seeing that for the first 50 years of their life. And now, just in their sort of twilight years, as they're trying to enjoy it, they're seeing this, and I think they very much kind of tune out to it because they know that it's going to continue until they're a 6 feet hunter.
Yeah.
How do we tackle that without just losing the will? Because it seems relentless in many. Like at home, I live in Scotland. Although actually more than half the listeners to this podcast are in the US. On a weekly basis, you see some negative story in the press related somehow to part of the hunting community. Some of which maybe we deserve. A lot of which we don't.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Is part of that actually reflecting on the elements that need to change? Like in taking ownership of that?
Well, I've said this before, even on our podcast. If we don't unify, if we don't establish, and I don't want to have a bunch of rules, in this industry because I do love that it's still got a little bit of this kind of wild side to it, but unless we really unify and we establish some real standards, whether it's ethically, whether it's our practices, people are going to start making choices for us. And if we don't start getting into the conversations out there, because what I've seen is there's kind of this kind of FU mentality to the general population. This is who we are, and we're going to do this.
And if you don't like it, you don't have to be involved.
Yeah, if you don't like it, go back to your avocado toast. But
there's nothing wrong
which
with
I think
avocado
is stupid.
Well,
I like it. So
I love avocado toast, but I am beginning to feel increasingly guilty about eating avocados. But that's a whole other story.
But I like it's good, right? But so that's kind of the position I come from, that, we do need to start getting into those larger cultural conversations. We need to do it from a position of, authority, respect, empathy, and because, there's plenty of evidence out there that, people who are responding negatively to some of the attitudes in our industry, they're going to be making decisions that will ultimately truly affect this way of life. And so I do think we as an industry, as hunters and anglers, do need to start really looking at, getting out into those conversations, listening, not just sort of, sticking to our entrenched beliefs. And again, it's a lot of the articles that you see when you do read things in the New York Times is generally not positive, though. I just saw a really great article in the Wall Street Journal where it's talking about the benefits of hunting as conservation, which is still a very polarizing topic. But I would love to see more of this industry actually speaking on this much larger cultural platform about, listen, what, the bad things you're seeing, here's a better way to frame this, I should say. Culturally, the exception is always a rule anyway, right now. That's American culture right now. And so I think when you do see, whether it's a poaching story or really poor treatment of animals, and I've seen so many stupid photos of what people do, and so I'm probably talking out of both sides of my mouth about being able to do what you want, but I do think that we as an industry can do a little better job of self-policing. We can do a better job of listening and then responding objectively and respectfully. There are always going to be anti-hunters out there, but I do think that particularly folks that I have friends who were vehemently anti-hunting until I share my experiences. They sort of seen just, because I always tell them, I said, you're going to be introduced to amazing places. You're going to be introduced to amazing people. Most hunters I know, in fact, I should say almost every hunter that I, talk to on a regular basis, they don't even like where some of this rhetoric is going, even in our own industry. But again, sometimes some of the sort of rougher elements have a bigger megaphone mouthpiece, and sort of tend to outshout some of the other conversations that are happening out there. But one thing I'm really, really proud of the angling industry is how it's done a really great job of really raising awareness of just, industrial abuse.
Yep.
Let me put it this way. I think the angling side of things tends to really collect or come together more for the betterment of everybody, not just anglers. I'd love to see the hunting industry do a lot more of that as well. And I think brands can really help really accelerate those conversations. I get why brands are scared to do that because, it could have a potential, audience, implications there. But I guess for me and again, I'll go back to I'm absolutely really positive about a lot of the change because I'm seeing a lot of brands really step up, really represent well, and I've seen even in the research, I've seen a lot of change in culture anyway. So I wouldn't say that it's not as good as it should be, but it's not as bad as it was. But there's still a lot more that we can be doing. But again, I say this to brands all the time, but I would love to see hunting become part of the fabric of America specifically again, like it was. We used to have the first week off of November in school.
Really,
when I was in middle school, I should say, back in the 1800s when because people just went out and went hunting, and that was it was family time and it was all that. But I think that a lot of times too, as people start to profit on the outdoors, as people start to build businesses that are specifically in the outdoors. Again, more and more, the more they can start from a position of where this is good for everybody, whether you do it or not. And I think it's a narrative that exists that I wish was much stronger.
Yeah, as I think about how we just as humans exist on this planet at increasing populations, and with the pressure that we have on every environment and basically every corner of the globe, my view of the future of conservation and our ability to hold on to these things that we certainly say we hold dear, even if our actions don't necessarily reflect that, is much more about integrating humans within a landscape than this more preservationist view where we keep humans out. And I can see why it frightens people to think about that. If we look at Central Africa and the Congo Basin, and we look at all the forests being felled there, and the extirpation of different species because of poaching and international illegal trade, and that's mirrored, and particularly in South America, it tends to be in these most biodiverse places on the planet. Sadly, our minds immediately go to, well, get the people out, so that these areas can be safe. But I don't see that as a long-term possibility. I think a much more pragmatic view is, how can we integrate ourselves back with nature so that and I don't want to use the word balance because I think that it's overused and was very misunderstood, because there is no balance in nature. There's only shifting baselines all the time. And the most obvious way that people can access this integration and a greater understanding and living in a more sympathetic way with the landscape is to participate in these kind of activities. Now, don't get me wrong, I am not suggesting that everybody should, or indeed that actually everybody can. We have too many people.
Yeah.
But we should be comfortable with understanding how those people who want to can live within a landscape with nature rather than pulling themselves out. And that's how I see hunting. That's how I see fishing. And I think one of the amazing things that has been driven through the combination of articles and stories being told within Modern Huntsman is we are telling stories of regenerative agriculture.
Yeah.
And the next page is a story about spearfishing. I see them as the same thing.
Yeah.
It is, how do we live in this planet in a better way?
Right. Well, I mean, yes.
On this planet.
Yes, to all that. I think a honey buddy and a wildlife biologist friend was, we're pretty much, I guess, according to his research, we are past the point where humans, we actually are actively affecting everything, right? Like there's no area of the world where animals aren't affected by humans. So
in one way, I mean, the fact that we have global climate change means that everything's affected.
Right. Yeah. So I think that, yes, I agree with you. And I think that, wow, I mean, there's a lot there you can go into, but I think, you look at, I've seen just the transformational effect on friends who have brought out hunting, even just generally camping, because probably just the disconnect, and the continued growing disconnect with nature and people in our daily lives is it's not great. And, it was always, at least part of American culture, is one of our best, assets was just, the wild spaces and open spaces. But I also think getting in psychologically, because, there's all these books about nature bathing and they've actually been able to really prove out the effect that nature has
on personal well-being.
On personal well-being and all that.
It's very difficult to quantify. But.
Yeah, absolutely. But just taking a more holistic approach to what it means to be human on this planet, how we interact with this planet, and having a point of view and building a way of life that is respectful of that, I think is great. I do think that, I've seen quite a bit of arguments, that, oh boy, I don't want to go there. I was about to go somewhere.
That's okay. We can move on.
I do want to
go. Next thought.
Yeah.
I sometimes it's hard not to feel just completely downtrodden by the direction that humans are taking globally, even before we look at the hunting space.
Yeah.
And before we look at the fishing space, which was a very big part, if I think about my formative years and the things that kind of shaped me and the character that I have and how I am, even between people, obviously that is somewhat shaped by relationships, but it is also shaped by my relationships with people, but it's also shaped by my relationships with the great outdoors.
Right.
And I think it's also, for me personally, it gave me the ability to be comfortable by myself, like in myself.
Yeah.
Because there is a certain peace and contentment that you get by spending time in nature.
Yeah.
And I can think to probably only, I honestly believe that in any one lifetime, there probably is only a very small number of moments. And they're not like days. They're small little moments, little niche moments of pure contentment.
Yeah.
Where it couldn't possibly be any better.
Yeah.
And if I was to think about those, the small number that there are, more of them are just being in nature.
Yep.
Okay, I think probably all of them I was also hunting. Well, actually, I can think of one. I'll name one because I remember very specifically every detail of it. Was sitting in the mountains in the Himalayas in Nepal. It was a hunting trip. I wasn't hunting. I was taking photos. I was doing my job. I was taking photos and making film. But we were there on a hunting trip. And I was sitting looking at the sun going down, casting this final blue shadows over the mountain tops with the peaks lit up by snow. On my own, the camp was back a few hundred meters away, and I'm sitting on the stone, camera sitting on my lap, and I was looking out at the mountains. And I just had this epiphany of pure contentment. There was nothing that could be better than that moment in my life. And I very distinctly remember that. And I know that I'm not going to have that many of them.
Yeah.
So we need to find them. And I think that I would be very surprised if people to really think hard about it. I would think a lot of those are probably going to be somewhere experiencing the great outdoors. They're not going to be in a building somewhere.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe, it might be a particular time of a certain relationship you've had with someone. I think that is very true, even if I think of it myself. But those pure contentments, it's...
Yeah,
it's something about our deep-seated historical connection with nature and how we evolved as humans in the first place that I think keeps taking us back there.
Yeah, I have a few of those moments. I call them my truly wild moments. Mine was the first solo elk hunt I did in Colorado, and I was out for a week, and it was, I think, even my third time, elk hunting. And I remember it was the first time I experienced the most extreme full spectrum of emotions, where the first night, and I remember it was boiling hot. I remember I slept on top of my sleeping bag outside of a tent under the stars, and it was, I'm not afraid to say it was the most freaked out I've been, just because it was such a foreign, environment without people around. Truly out by myself. But I just, being alone inside your own head is really scary for a lot of people, but for a full week where I didn't talk to anybody, it was just me out there. And how you then, then sort of my second wild moment was I really realized, like, wait a minute, I was getting up just before sunrise and I was pretty much passing out asleep just before.
It's amazing that.
And how quickly you just align and get into the flow of the fabric of the cosmos here. And my other one was, and as silly as it sounds, but I remember I took a bath in a high alpine lake completely naked, and I remember I swam out right to the middle of it, and I remember just realizing, like, here I am completely in my birthday suit, sitting out there in the middle of this high alpine lake, nobody around, just surrounded by mountains. And I know, that's probably half of Instagram right now, but but I remember that moment because it was just the most wild and free, and as cliche as it sounds, but it was like I felt high, like it was just this incredible
high on life,
yeah. And it was just so great. And but I probably have a million of those little moments where even just being surrounded by coyotes howling in the middle of the night, by myself, to even sometimes I didn't even light a campfire. It was just nice to just kind of sit there, and I didn't bring any books because I forgot them, but it was. I remember it felt like I had been gone for 3 months when I came back out of the mountains, and I can honestly say, and I'm sure half your listeners or all your listeners will roll your eyes, but I really felt like I was a different person walking out of those mountains, and it's interesting what your body does when you're tired, you've been out in the elements so long. Like, weird crap in your brain from like third grade playground insults come back, and like it feels like your body's just trying to just fight it, but when you kind of, it's like a rubber band that just, you pulled so much it just snapped, and I just felt just so a part of the landscape, as opposed to just feeling like I was kind of in it, and having been a hiker,
participating within it rather than being a spectator.
And when I tell people that story, and I've had a couple of friends who've had similar experiences, they're the same way, where they just realize, like, wait a minute, this is just how I want to live my life, for the rest of my life. So, but yeah, I just would love to see more people do that and experience that, because I have, I live in New York City, LA, San Francisco, and I had a lot of friends who were just like so terrified of even the thought of going camping, and I get that too. But
how did you, in your head, when you were living in big cities?
Yeah.
How did you balance the clear desire that you have, and it's very obviously a very fundamental part of being who you are, being out, like sitting where we're sitting now in Montana with the mountains and the sun and the freedom to walk in the open spaces and to hunt and fish. How did you balance that with the existence inside a place, like LA, for example?
Yeah, well, a lot of places. Well, first and foremost, I was always scratching at the walls to get out. So any opportunity I had to go up in the mountains outside of LA or just travel a lot, I did that. Even when my daughter was born, she was on my back while I was, out hiking or fishing or whatnot. But through books, through media, all of the above, really. And I think that's why you've seen such a rise in that, particularly, on things like Netflix, where people, escape into it. But I was always the type, if I wasn't actually out doing it, I was constantly daydreaming about it, but, and I always felt like I wish I was doing it more. I'll be honest, in those areas before I moved, to
it's Colorado, weird though, because, for me, so I spent a number of years working in cities in what feels like a previous life now, certainly a previous career, 2 previous careers. And I actually did more hunting during those periods where I lived in cities than I do now. Yeah. because now it's my everyday, and I'm writing or taking photos or podcasting, whatever. Whereas then I hated my Monday to Friday 9 to 5, and I was daydreaming and thinking like every moment that I could not be doing my job, I was thinking about that. And then I was so fed up at the end of the week, all I would do all weekend was just go fishing or hunting or camping or whatever it might be. But almost now that I have almost the luxury to be able to do it whenever I want, I seem to do it less. Maybe I need to readjust my life. I don't know.
Or maybe you don't realize you're doing it more than you think. Probably,
maybe because it isn't this, because it is so accessible. It isn't this thing that I'm just longing for all week.
Yeah. No, and it really depended on the city. New York City. Funny enough, I learned how to fly fish in the Harlem Mere in Central Park.
Really?
Yep. And
what is that?
So Harlem Mere is it's a giant it's a artificial pond in Central Park. And I remember one day I was walking by an Orvis store, and I grew up going to Orvis when I was a kid, and always rub my cheek up against all the cool outdoor stuff. But,
who didn't?
But I remember I walked by an Orvis store, and I saw a reflection of myself in the mirror, and you kind of matched the hatch. You live in New York City. I had all the New York City clothes on. I was working in advertising, in the corporate world, but. I remember looking at a mirror reflection of myself, and I thought I look like an absolute moron. I was wearing all these like trendy New York clothes. I look like a cast member from the show Star Trek. Look at this, and I just realized it wasn't me. And I had one of those. So oddly enough, I really just fell in love with the possibilities of living more of an outdoor wild life. And I remember I walked in, and I walked over to the fly fishing department, and there was this really grizzled guy. In the back at the time, really, really funny he was literally a cartoon character. And I said, how do I get into fly fishing? Like, how do I do this? Like, I had a general sense how you do it, but I said, where can I go learn this? Are there places? And he says, well, I can take you into Central Park and I can teach you how to cast. And so fast forward, a week, and here I was, sitting, in the middle of Central Park, in front of this casting pond with all these people walking by, with this long back cast,
Amazing.
Of course, dropping it, because I was dropping my wrist, still do. But it was, I always like, it was such a fun way. And he was still the best casting instructor I ever had. But I would drive upstate, and that's actually led me to go, that's how I got into restoring old Range Rovers, because I found this just beater Rover, and because we had to park on the street and I want to get a new car, and I was literally, sitting under it, as the street sweepers were kind of going around me, give me the finger, working on it. But I would drive every weekend. I would just drive upstate and just go hit the rivers up there, and I knew
it's amazing how accessible that is from New York. And the only reason I know that is because of Danny, who's been on the podcast before, who now lives in Italy, but was a high-end photographer and high-end fashion photographer in New York. And he was telling me about his escapes at the weekend. I was like, you can do that and live in the middle of New York?
Beautiful out there. And I really feel lucky to have, it still has and anything heritage I'll always, I always feel strongly for, but, just some of those just legacy rivers up there, and I know there are legacy rivers everywhere, but the legacy rivers up there, the culture of fly fishing there, it was so great. And, that led to us just buying a place upstate. We lost a friend in 9/11, and we just said, we got to get out of the city. And
were you in the city?
Yeah.
Then?
Yeah.
You were? Wow.
Yeah, I actually went cycling with my friend who died that morning in Central Park.
He lived in the towers?
He worked in the towers? She worked there, yep. And Nancy Morgenstern was her name.
Wow.
And she was actually on my wife's cycling team, but she and I were doing a training ride in Central Park because I lived right off the park. And that morning, and then she left early because she had to get into Dancer Fitzgerald earlier, and she passed in 9/11. So we went through this, we had to get out. So we bought this small place in upstate New York, but I had a stream through my backyard. So it was great. So we do trout and eggs in the morning every once in a while. But I did a lot more of it there. And that's where I got into pheasant hunting out there, because across the street was a farmer. It's still, though, it just vast swaths of land. He owned just a really great spot. But I just would go across the street, got to be friendly with him. He said, hey, let's go grab a couple birds and, cook some Thanksgiving stuff. So that's how I got into pheasant hunting. I'm going back now, 21 years ago now. But regardless, everybody, though, and I've been really fortunate, everybody who's ever indulged my stupid questions, my newbie thing, has always been welcoming. And so I feel very, very fortunate. I've had friends who've had the opposite experience, candidly, but who've walked into, either a fly shop where people were thumbing their nose, as you said, or they've walked into they want to get an archery, because they didn't really want to get into the gun thing, so they went in archery first, and you walked in some bow shops that were it's intimidating, and you see people with just looking at a compound bow and just like, how do you even start? What do I even buy? Who do I talk to? All that stuff. But I've been really, really fortunate on that front. But yeah, I've had such a very atypical way of moving into the world of hunting and fishing. But you see a lot of it now. I mean, actually, one of the best fly shops that I've ever seen was actually in downtown San Francisco. And at lunch, I'd always go and hang out there and just kind of escape for a little bit there. But even in San Francisco, there was just really great fishing out there and great hunting out there. Definitely a lot more restrictions out there, and it seems to be more and more every year. But
what's the name of the fishing shop? So I can go
Leland
visit
Fly Fisher.
there? Say again?
Leland Fly Shop.
Okay.
Yep. And if you really want to do it, you'll find a way, and that's what I was told.
Even if you're in an urban place.
Even if like we lived in Venice and in LA, but we bomb up north and get after it.
As a way to wrap this conversation up, we are sitting only a stone's throw from Livingston, which happens to be a location rather close to your heart because of a particular writer, Jim Harrison.
Jim Harrison, yes. So I was very fortunate that my dad force-fed me Tom McGuane and Jim Harrison. Jim Harrison, So
I'm going to, just for context, for people who don't know who Jim Harrison is, a lot of people who listen to this podcast, I would think, have probably seen Legends of the Fall, the film, even if you haven't read the book. That's Jim Harrison.
Yeah, that was probably his. Well, it depends on who you talk to. That was his first sort of mass cultural sort of success. But he'd been writing. He started as a poet, and then I started writing books. But as cliche as it sounds, he was the one writer. Even at a young, I'm still dumb, but when I was dumb back then too. But just the one writer where I was just completely lost in it, like spoke to me, all those cliches, but. And it was a real honor to actually spend time with Tom McGuane and have him on our podcast as well, which was, they say never meet your heroes, but it was the total opposite. He was just as amazing as I thought he'd ever be. And, but here in Livingston, Jim Harrison, just the stories.
Have you met Jim Harrison?
No, never. I wish. I did hang out with his grandson a couple days ago though, at his wine shop, Jim Harrison's old wine shop here in town. But Livingston has just there's so many great writers here, Doug Peacock and obviously McGuane and so many others. But it's always hearing about it, you'd always see Livingston attached to Jim Harrison, whether he was being interviewed or whether he talk about it. He obviously lived outside, but I always just have such a love. So to actually be here and I do business here now and spend a great deal of time on here now. This is one of my favorite spots on earth. I get why. If I was Jim Harrison, I'm surprised that not everyone lives here right now. But,
I think a lot of people are thinking.
Yeah, it's probably a matter of time, right? But
tell the story about him, like how. My understanding was he wrote Legends of the Fall and changed like one word or something crazy.
I'm sure there's a lot of myth around it. So,
but I've heard he talked about it as well.
He wrote it in 9 days.
Okay.
It didn't really change much. It was one of those, I have musician friends who've, they said an entire song just comes to them with lyrics, everything. I think maybe it was like that. That was, I think the fastest story he ever wrote that made him the most money. So it's funny how life works. But so
it was a good hourly rate, that one.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. Right. but yeah, he was but one thing I just love about Jim Harrison was that, as how a lot of authors go, they become kind of celebrity icons, things like that. He always seemed like so just true to why he did it to begin with. I always loved reading about his advice to writers. Either you're going to pour your whole self into it or don't do it. So
that's what he said.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And he says it's going to be just a horrible broke life and, hopefully it makes some money as a career. Yeah. But I just, anyway, but again, very fortunate that, my dad would buy me all of McGuane's and particularly Jim Harrison's books. And I've read them all, many, many times. But he was just, not only just a phenomenal storyteller, but just the way he wrote, his word choices, everything was just on such another level. And, obviously, I'd be lying to say that, I even fell more in love with fly fishing, having read Jim Harrison. I grew up in Wisconsin and Michigan. Obviously, Jim Harrison's from Northern Michigan. So just, it was a connection to the place I was living at the time. But then as I grew up, I just would always come back to Jim Harrison. And I just... and also his love for food. I'm a total wannabe gourmet chef, and just he was a prodigious drinker and eater, and
hence the reason he had a wine shop.
But exactly but regardless, just how he lived his life, the things he wrote about, the stories he told. I mean, I just I come back to him every month.
So you write as well.
On a good day.
You had you had an article, at least one, I think, in this latest volume of Modern Huntsman, Volume 6. Is there anything from? I mean, clearly you have a passion for understanding these amazing writers of the past, Jim Harrison included. Is there anything from the readings of their works or your conversations with them or about them that you take forward into your own kind of process of writing? I know we were geeking out around the table the other day because we're all writers, and we were talking about the writing process and how it's very, very different for each person. And some of us struggle or feel like we struggle with it more than others. And I'm always very sort of envious and jealous of people who seem to just be able to sit down and spew it all out onto the page. But I think the reality of a lot of writing is it's probably not as easy, even for good writers, as people may think.
Nope. It was really good to hear Tom McGuane talking about the writing process, where he said, everyone thinks that, and obviously you get better at starting, as what Tom McGuane said, is the more you write, but it's still just as hard all the time. I still get that anxiety when I see that blinking cursor, particularly if I know someone's eventually going to read this thing. I think I was, I'm a copywriter by background in marketing, so that was just how I made my money, was writing, everything from Super Bowl commercials to print ads to radio spots back when they had those.
But that's a very different process
and there's a way you write it. It's very truncated. In fact, you even script grammar, but for me, I'd say the one thing I love about Jim Harrison, a couple things. One is he I think more than a lot of writers, he was always writing from insights. So he wasn't necessarily observing things and using really interesting turns of phrases to explain what he's observing, but he'd really write on insights. And what I mean by insight is it's almost like stand-up comedy. What makes stand-up comedy so great is that it's really it's calling out something that you've kind of been thinking, but they actually said it in a way that you're like, aha, you connect the dots in your own mind. But as a result of hearing it, you'll never look at that thing the same way again. And Jim Harrison, it was just such an insightful writer, because he'd get down to the why certain things were happening more so than a lot of writers. But that's one thing that I always try to bring into my writing, is really start with just a really strong insight, and not a general observation, but a true insight behind something. So that's one thing. But the other thing I really liked about Jim Harrison's writing, and at least when I do like outdoor writing per se for Modern Huntsman, but Jim Harrison, while he certainly has been compared to Hemingway, and he's sometimes said he's drawn inspiration from him or not, but Jim Harrison kind of had the opposite of Hemingway, where there's a lot of the hyperbolic kind of macho thing where you had to prove yourself against nature. Jim Harrison would always write from the fact that if you try to go against nature, you're always going to lose. A lot of
that's where all those stories end.
A lot of his protagonists end up dying, as opposed to coming away where I felt like I'd proven who I was as a result of this experience with nature. But yeah, he always had this very honest way of writing, and he didn't try to really. He wasn't hyperbolic at all. He was very very real, but very human, and he had this kind of self-deprecating kind of things. But particularly he had this kind of comedic sort of spell through his Brown Dog series, which he was really funny, and it was really weird to read comedic writing from Jim Harrison, but He always just had this sense that he was never better than anybody. He was never better, at these things. He was always kind of like, I'm kind of...
Even though he was,
right? But, he was always, kind of writing from the perspective of like, I'm kind of like, he'd talk about how he'd get hurt or how he'd screw things up. And he was the one who'd start writing about, missing fish, which was just unheard of. You never used to write about that, right? But
and everybody misses fish.
Yeah, right? No, I catch every time I go out. But no, it's just...
The biggest fish I've ever not caught are the ones I've missed.
But his poetry, and this might sound really precious, and I'm a moron, but his poetry is incredible. I was never a big...
I've never read any.
Never a big poetry fan, but his poetry is amazing.
I'll have to look it up.
It is incredible, and I mean, I will never be a Jim Harrison, but he's definitely someone to aspire to write as well as at some point. But no, I mean, honestly, from a writing standpoint, it's as hard as me as it was since day one, and the self-loathing, the anxiety, and the
I love the blinking cursor analogy.
Oh, it's terrifying.
Well, that's why it's better just to put something down.
Yeah.
I always find even if it's just the title.
Yep.
Sometimes I'll sit there looking and I'll just go and put publication, Modern Huntsman, author, Byron Pace.
Yeah. No.
Pictures or images, Byron Pace. And then that's sometimes enough to soften the blow of starting.
I agree. And that's the thing, is you just have to starting. And, just some advice I've given, writers that have worked for me in the past, in the creative industry is, just starting. And I would say write it dumb first. Just get it all out of your head. Don't spew it out. Just spew it out. Stream of consciousness. And then you go back. Clarity before poetry. Then you can always gild the lily. You can always go back and really color things up. And that, at least for me, that really works because I used to get so hung up on how can I write this really compelling. Even less than the perfection. Just how do I write this really clever, really unexpected way about this? And it just got in the way of getting it done. And so I do that now where I'll just literally write. I don't even spell check. I don't, almost like Cormac McCarthy, I won't even put any punctuation in. And I just get it all out. And then you can truncate it. Then you kind of go through and you take the copy shears out and trim and whatnot. But the best advice I got was from one of my best writing mentors in the advertising world. He said, I would go in and he would say, okay, this is great. I want to see more white on the page. Shrink this. Just cut it in half. And I would sit there and go, I can't cut this in half. And he'd say, cut it in half. And it was really forcing you just to distill it down to its most potent, simplistic form. And that for some reason, because I have to put kind of mental pictures to how I improve my writing. So, and maybe it's weird, but that was really good advice for me where you realize that the audience and the reader in particular is probably smarter than you are. They can make that inductive leap in their heads of why you're conveying things. So just write enough. And the other thing too that this is Tom McGuane's advice, which I've written down to 100 places, but he always said you want to make sure that you don't see the writer in the story. Make sure that it's the story. And that for me was like a click for me. Because I'd always, I do think you need your own voice. I definitely think you need, your own points of view, but like Salman Rushdie's a writer that sometimes you feel like you're holding the book upside down because he's so it's like he's bragging when he's writing because of how smart he is, and he gets in the way of the story in a lot of ways, even though he's a phenomenal writer, obviously. But Umberto Eco's another writer like that, where you almost have to have your phone or encyclopedia next to you just to understand what the hell he's referencing, because he would really showboat with these really esoteric, archaeological references to things and past cultures and whatnot. But I just really aspire to writers that they just tell a great story. And that's why I love Hemingway. I love Hemingway style writing, where it's just really simple. You strip out adverbs, you strip out metaphors, you strip out all that. Just tell the story, because the audience is going to understand what you're saying, and they're going to bring their own experiences to it. They're going to bring their own sort of color to it in their own mind's eye. So just start with a really great idea for a story, get that down, and then and just make sure that there's nothing but the story in there. And so that's just me, but that's really helped me get to the point faster, because I talk a lot and I can ramble, but and my emails are always 50 pages long. The people that work for me are like, oh God, I got to sit here for 6 hours and
read through all this.
TLDR, I used to get a lot of responses, but
I get it though. I know exactly what you're saying, because I find myself doing that, whether I'm writing something like academically or whether I'm writing something that's story-based. I find that to rationalize what I'm trying to say in my own mind, sometimes I have to go and write a couple of paragraphs, or I have to write a whole page. And then when I come, so it's now twice as long as it needs to be. And I know that I've gone over my word limit, but I try not to think too much about the word limit once I've worked out what the concept is of what I'm going to write about. Been the word limit within reason. You don't want to write 20,000 words when it's 1,500 words. Otherwise, how the hell are you ever going to cut that back? But I just go for it, because I'm looking for all the things that I feel like are important. Then set it aside. If I have the time, come back to it a week later. Things are settled in your mind, and you go through and you realize, okay, I know that now I understand what I was trying to say to myself, explain to myself in a way what these couple of paragraphs are saying. I can do it in 2 sentences. And you end up with a better story. And you're forced to do that with academic stuff all the time, because you're writing to answer whatever the question is, and they're to the word for submitting it, and then you're really forced. Like, how am I going to take this out? And you realize when you start reading through sentences, like, I just used 3 sentences to say something I could have said in 1.
Yeah.
And it's a really good exercise, actually. It's forced me to do it recently. And sometimes, I mean, that's a little different because sometimes it can restrict some of the creative flair. So it's a little bit different when you're talking about submitting a paper. But it's a really good exercise to go through your personal writing to say, how can I simplify this? Because why use a whole bunch of words that you don't need to use?
Absolutely.
Like you're saying, just to make you sound and feel smart.
Yeah. And I mean, I get guilty of that sometimes, or I am guilty, I should say.
Me
of that
too.
Sometimes. But two last pieces of advice I think for writing, which really helped me as well, is and this is another Tom McGuane comment, but he said that a lot of times he'll always have his laptop open. He might have a name of a character, and he'll go in and he just writes down the name, and he might walk away for a day or two. Then he might have just a sentence. And just keep picking away at it, and eventually you'll get there. The other, I would say it's the best book, because I'm sure there's some out there I haven't seen, but the best book I've read on writing is Stephen King's book on writing. It's so good, and I would say, if you can, listen to the audiobook as he reads it. And it is probably the most influential book on me. And you listen to it, and I started getting really embarrassed as I was listening to it, because I'm making all these mistakes. Right?
So he's identifying the mistakes writers make.
He talks about taking out adverbs. He talks about how you just sort of structure a story. I also would say to people, really take a good screenwriting class. There's a real great book by Robert McKee called Story, which is kind of considered the Bible of screenwriting. Screenwriting, while it's much different, but it really forces you to really get into character, motivation. It really gets you into thinking about what do all the characters want, how do they all combine, and then now I'm actually adding here. Another one is John August, who's a famous screenwriter, wrote Big Fish, one of the best screenplays I think ever written. He's got this deck of cards called the Writer's Emergency Pack. It's such a great tool. I use it for everything from hard conversations to writing, but it's a deck of cards that you flip through, where you'll write, let's say, a scene in a screenplay, or you'll write a chapter, for all the novels I've started and never finished. But then one of the cards will say something like, okay, now take this story back 200 years and change your male protagonist to a female. It just really helps you shift it up a little bit, shake it up a little bit, where you can get into deeper, more interesting stuff, more unexpected stuff. But that should be on every desk of every writer. The John August Writer's Emergency Pack. It's phenomenal. He's also got a great podcast on writing, particularly for screenwriting, but it's great for anybody who wants to write. And I would say even if you're a filmmaker or photographer, it's good to listen to as well, because it's really podcasts about creativity and storytelling. But those are just some tools that help. And but again, I think just the best advice is just starting. Get something out on paper. You can come back to it and delete it all again. Apple Notes is really big for me, where there'll be times I'm just sitting there and I have this idea for a scene, just write it down. And but as cliche as it sounds, if you're a writer, write every day.
That's probably good advice, and I do not do that enough. I mean, I read every day.
Yep.
Which is also important.
It's very important.
Very important to read and to vary your reading. Try and read outside the genre that you write in is very important. And I find I don't have enough time to do it.
Yeah.
But it's really important. Maybe just lastly then, so talking about people or looking to people who have aspirations of writing within the outdoor space, or maybe more specifically, like we've been talking today, the hunting and fishing space. Me as a kid, I always wanted to be published in a fishing magazine, and I've still never done that. What advice would you give to somebody who wants?
Well, I would say
it was all I wanted to do when I was like 18.
If I was able to do it, anybody can do it. I'll say that. It's like anything. You have to want it irrationally. Yeah. Where you will find a way. It's like,
if you want it bad enough.
When I've broken bones in the woods and there's nobody around, I'm in extreme pain. You just figure a way to get out of there. And I've broken many bones in the outdoors. But fallen off cliffs, you name it. I've Murphy's Law outside. But you have to want it more than anything, and you have to be willing to sacrifice for it. And luck is always a big part of it. But if you put yourself out there, and that's why I would say too, just put yourself out there, the real you, and the wrong people will leave and the right people will come. I really, truly believe that. And I don't want to get really woo-woo here with that, but But when I started just really putting myself out there, and I'd have people, the peanut gallery either flaming me for certain things, but it was surprising enough, people really do root for you more than they root against you. And the other thing too is it's even how I got in the ad industry, which is very hard to break into, particularly on the creative side, because it's a hell of a way to make money, and be an adult child for the rest of your life. But it's amazing what happens when you just reach out to somebody. And there's at the time, at least in advertising, and I think it's analogous to the hunting industry, but 9 out of 10 times people will help you. They might not get back to you right away, but it's amazing the power of the telephone. And don't stalk them and find out their cell phone number. But if you do reach out to somebody, 9 out of 10 times they actually will take a few minutes to spend time and help you. And so that's why I say raise your hand, and you have to tell people what you want. It's what my grandmother used to always tell me. You have to tell people what you want, and you'll probably get it at some point.
Mm-hmm. But someone wants them to be careful what you wish for.
There's that too. Oh, yeah.
Because sometimes you'll get what you wish for.
I agree with that. I'm probably living proof of that in some corners of my life. But I do really believe though that and again maybe I'm parroting Jim Harrison here, but you have to want it and pour yourself into it, and just dive in with both feet, and just talk to everybody you can, network as much as you can. Really identify the people whose writing you really like, and reach out and just tell them that. And I've had people send me stuff. I always love reading. I'm always very flattered by it when people reach out and say, "Hey, could you read some stuff that I'm putting together?" But that's what I'd say. There's like this old viral video that was out, and it might be a little silly, but I thought it was the most accurate thing about anything you want to pursue in your life. But there's a story about the football coach took the young football player out, and he made him wade out deeper and deeper and deeper, and made him sit out in the ocean, kind of bobbing until eventually, like he's starting to bob under the water. And he says you have to want to play football more than you need air. And I really do believe that. You have to want it so irrationally and with every fiber of your being. And I really do believe in, there's all these books about the law of attraction, but there's some truth to that where, I think you just create this, it rearranges your atoms when you finally have made that decision. And the universe does, for the most part, conspire in your favor. I do believe that as well. And for me, I've always wanted to, swan dive back into the outdoor business full time, and I just made the decision to do it. I've taken, a pay cut to do it. It's come with some sacrifice. It's come at the loss of friends in some corners of my life, but it's the happiest I've ever been, and it's the most fulfilling I've ever been. Even during a dry spell, like you just don't give up. And it's hard not to, and believe me, it's hard for everybody. But I poured myself into just this, and just wanted to do this, and surround myself with people who do this, and and I feel very, very lucky as a result. But
yeah, being present in the place that you want to be, and
absolutely,
things will come. Bill, it's been a very insightful conversation. we've spanned the gamut in terms of topics.
Yeah, that's a weird conversation with Bill Roden going all over the place.
I would never have guessed that from conversations with you before. I really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
It's great to sit down and just let our minds go.
Yeah, it's good to not have to focus on the task at hand and just talk.
I love it.
Boy, I'm done.
I love it. I think you get the best conversations that way.
I agree.
Thank you so much, and I look forward to. What we're going to have to do is we're going to have to revisit this again in a year's time, and
I'll completely contradict everything I said.
Maybe, but next time what we should do is we should have maybe a Modern Huntsman big joint team podcast.
Love that.
That would be amazing.
Yeah.
All the different editors around the room, get Tyler, we'll all get headsets on, and we can talk about what the journey's been. I think that would be amazing.
I think that would be great. I'd even love just to read some of the submissions we get. Because that's one thing I love about Modern Huntsman is that a big part of what we're about is really giving a platform for new voices.
Yeah.
Because that's another thing, even with the industry, is there seems to be 20 voices that are just dominating the conversation.
Yeah. I'm in the industry, and even I feel like sometimes it's difficult to break through to some aspects.
It is, yeah. So we'll read. So send your submissions in, we'll read them.
Yeah, great. Bill, thank you so much. We'll speak to you again soon.
All right, thanks.